Well, hello everyone. This is our second annual global Big Blue Button World Congress conference, and I just want to welcome you all for joining. Thank you so much. Over the last 2.5 years, Big Blue Button has supported more than 3 billion minutes of online teaching for more than 1 million educators, making it the most adopted open source education platform in the world. This 4-day conference brings together the teachers, the administrators, the developers, and the commercial partners who help make Big Blue Button what it is today. My name is Robert Hawking. I'm the Director of Brand Strategy of Big Blue Button. I'll be your host for day one, the theme of which is Hope Through Education. Today is the day that we dedicate to educators, to administrators, and our singular focus as a platform is to make education possible by creating the most teacher-centric virtual classroom in the world. And so what better way to start our conference than by focusing on the very people we serve. So over the course of the next 3 hours, we're honored to welcome educational leaders from around the world, professionals who truly are bringing hope and furthering the goal of making the world a better place through their efforts. Now, just before we kick off, it is a very tight schedule. I'd ask you to please direct any questions you may have for our speakers through the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end of the presentation. And one more thing, as we get closer to the end of our speakers' presentations, you'll see a link pop up in the chat that will take you to the next speaker. So please feel free to join us. We'd love to have you there. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first keynote speaker, Roy Saurabh. Roy is the digital transformation lead at UNESCO and Human-Computer Interaction researcher at UDP and former chief technology officer for UNESCO's Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development. Roy's developed real-world inclusive applications leveraging AI, cognitive modeling, human-machine interaction, data mining, and data visualization with a focus on human development and prosperity. Roy, I'd love to welcome you as our first keynote today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rob. Hope you can hear me well enough. Awesome. Thanks a ton. It's a real honor and a privilege to be a keynote at this conference. I'm really looking forward to sharing with you what we are currently doing at UNESCO and what we did as a response to pandemic and crisis itself. So taking a step back, as Rob mentioned, I'm also a researcher in HCI, as well as work in my previous roles within UNESCO itself. We launched our own platform called Frame-a-Space, which was intention to mainstream social emotional learning within STEM subjects itself. And how do you use AI models, specifically things around affective computing and stuff, to make sure that how learners emote also comes into a learner journey and the recommendation and which comes in. Just before starting advising on the digital transformation part of it, I was also a core member of on drafting UNESCO's recommendation on ethics of AI, which again, as you mentioned, is also a very critical angle, that it's not just about making sure that the learning is supported within a digital ecosystem, but how do you ethically do it? Which principles are in tension with which ones, and how do you create frameworks where the learners, as well as the teachers and other stakeholders, they feel it's a safe space. Coming to my current role and what we are trying to do, and it's a huge challenge which I'll try to share with you, and it's a multi-layered challenge at every level. Every stakeholder has their own set of challenges, but at the same time, it's a challenge which we collectively need to work towards, and that's the hope why I chose this initiative as one of the things which we talk about, because there are a lot of things which UNESCO does, right from very cutting edge things towards verifiable credentials for learners who are on move, do not have identity as well established as we may be familiar with, as well as to places and learners who are totally disconnected from, forget about even digital infrastructure, but even in terms of civilization infrastructures and systems are something which are not accessible. So the initiative, which was again was mobilized as a response to the pandemic, which unfortunately is still yeah, it's still not going away. It started right when the first detections and the cases came in. Apologies that the slider is actually not moving, but it's from 17th till 26th of March when the Global Education Coalition was something which was launched, to when the first ministerial meetings where member states which happened, which allowed them to understand what the platform capabilities include. All of this is something which happened between 17th of February 2020 till 26th of May, when we had the first learners provided a digital infrastructure which could make sure that their learning is there's some semblance of normalcy which comes back in their learning life. And the key things which came through, and this is something which I wanted to put upfront itself. It's not necessary for you if the font is small and you're not able to read through each one of them. But what I did want to highlight, because again, as I understand that the audience does connect, has a community which is multi-stakeholders. So learners did not have access to prerequisites. For example, even it's not just about devices and internet, but also a quiet place to study, which sometimes people and especially developers, they don't think about. But if you have that in mind, that's when you are able to come up with more granular solutions like closed captions, like bigger fonts, Zoom capabilities, things and accessibility options, which even if someone does not have that quiet place to be able to hear out and may not afford an infrastructure like even a basic earphones and headphones, they too can still continue learning, even in the most basic numeracy and digital literacy skills. At teacher levels, it was not just around, they themselves needed to be upskilled on shifting from an offline to a purely digital play, which is what the lockdowns actually ended up doing. But also there already before the pandemic itself, the crisis of good teachers and qualified teachers were always there. And then the last column, which is about developing countries, and the challenge just exasperates. And there, just to quantify it in terms of just the sub-Saharan Africa, we knew that the shortage of teachers is gonna really blow up, and that's what ended up happening, which again was a major threat and a challenge to the learning, to forget about improving it from where it was, but even continuing the basic ones. The third part about technology solutions is where I really wanted to highlight, which I think does concern you and the community, which is community of practice, which you already have. Solutions which were designed, they could not be just plonked from one context to the other, and the reasons were that sometimes they were specific to age groups, so it created a hodgepodge of solutions for a school administrator to consider, or for Ministry of Education to think about, as well as for the digital ministry to procure, deploy, and train on. But also the other part, which is the model which, again, UNESCO was following, was that the number of partners, which you would see in a short while, they all offered free services, which was amazing. And the amount of time within which the responses were received, for the first time, we did have an unbelievable supply from private players and companies which had world-class products to step up and actually serve the underserved perfect. But the problems was to negotiate them to go this, and this is where we are right now, that when the pandemic's context goes away or is started to wane off and people are coming back to in-classroom solutions, how do you make sure that the offerings and the generosity which was there during during the COVID period still actually extends and does have sustainable business models? Because that's what and it's worse also sometimes in some places where those conversations did not happen or are not going the way it should go, is because then the learner data as well as the learner habits have got locked into platforms which do not have sustainability plans. And then again, if you look at, especially, and since Priority Africa is UNESCO's one of the key priorities, apart from gender for this period, is something where in less than 5% of the total global spend was on digital content, and that's something which really you can understand would have been is a big challenge with the whole continent was reeling under. In school systems also, decision-making was quite slow because the governance models were often fragmented. There were limited budgets. Digital maturity was very different. So within, for example, Africa itself, even the Anglophone, 5 countries itself, if you think, Ghana and Nigeria had a very different digital maturity level than, say, Liberia or Gambia. So again, the plans and what you start off with as a bridge intervention were highly contextual, and within the countries also then the digital divide, both from learning as well as from affordability, was something which was always in back of our mind. And every solution which we implemented, if this was not thought through, then the initiative sooner or later died down. So what were the objectives with which we started off with? Because it was something which happened really fast, where the task force really institutionalized it and mobilized it really fast. And the way we were going about it was first responding to the disruption, supporting the digital infrastructure, as well as when we say digital transformation, again, the spectrum is huge, where some places we really had to include even the channels where the learners were already there, which included maybe beyond what we consider means like laptops and systems and mobile phones. It was sometimes radios and televisions and one-way transmission screens and things, which is where the learner habits were drawn towards. While we were trying to cultivate the new ones, for which we had partners, we were trying to cater to where they already were. Then managing effective recovery from an advisory point of view, advising the administrators and the ministries of how and when things should be planned, because it was not just about educational ecosystem, but also the ones which was with health ministries, which was with digital ministries, which was with telecom ministries. Everyone needed to come together to be able to solve this crisis the right way. One of the biggest cogs of the wheel were how do you support teachers? How do you mobilize the workforces? How do you make sure that their digital skills and the mindset part of it is something which is also catered to, which was also a big challenge and objective of Global Education Coalition. And the final, it was how do you create that feedback loop? How do you make sure that the best practices, the collection, the build, the knowledge, the infrastructure is there for what's working, what's not working, to swiftly come back and share with others, as well as make those tweaks, and this not being just a linear way, but actually being an iterative curve on things. 3 flagships were 3 pillars on which the global education was operating. One was in-country interventions. The second was global flagships, which again had the 3 areas of connectivity, teachers, and gender. Again, when we say connectivity, it was not just about internet connectivity or the infrastructure part. It was also about access. With teachers also, it was not just about, just give them a platform and they would have an idea about what they need to do with it, but also about instructional design. It's also about how digital as a medium is not just a translation medium, but also a transformative medium, and that does require having very good cognizance of their mindsets and their attitude towards digital technology itself. Oftentimes, first time when they are interacting with it in a very consequential way. Gender through gender responsive policies, so that it makes sure that the marginalized community, especially female learners, are someone who are not forgotten, are not that equity part of it is something which is not lost at a gender parameter part of it. And finally, which is again data, knowledge, and advocacy, which is again about best practices, about what's working, what's not working, which are the countries which had similar ecosystems so that their learning with each other would have bigger relatability than the other, is something which was always as a part of the pillar of how the coalition was operating. So as you would see, we had players. We have the big players from each of, whether it's private sectors, whether it's civil societies, whether it's networks and association, as well as media partners. They're big names, and that's where I feel Big Blue Button also should try to join in and contribute. But the whole idea was this itself, and that thankfulness and learning for UNESCO was always there, that when a crisis comes in, the world does respond, irrespective of where they're coming from. Education is something, learning is something which does bring all multi-stakeholders together. And to be very honest, that's the only way these challenges could be addressed. Because again, at a learner level or at anyone's, any individual stakeholder level, it's always a multifaceted problem and issue. So here are some numbers where which is what we could achieve, where we had we already reached an impact is something, again, which were deep impacts and things where they became aware of things. So these are numbers which are still very, very small when you compare to the amount of disruption and the impact which has happened. So that's where none of this is over. And if you look at the pillars, even if pandemic is on the is going out, the relevance is increasing even more, because this is what we have been able to do because of this opportunity getting created, learning habits actually getting formed. How do you make sure that those learning habits keep on getting leveraged and have sustainable plans, both from a learner side as well as from policy, as well as the bedrock and the infrastructure and the ecosystem side of things. Again, as this is something which I did want to include, just because every single geography had a different intervention, and that's why the contextual assessment of what's needed where. What does the member state want, rather than, again, like what is UNESCO and its partners wanting to provide? It's always about what is required. Where are they right now? And that assessment being the fastest way to prioritize or to deprioritize something which may or may not be strength. So that's where that, like if you look at something like remote learning via radio in, say, a DRC versus in coalition in Africa and MENA, where it was about again, like how do you make sure that even the workforce development is something which is not left behind. To, for example, in Cameroon, where textbooks distribution was something which was prioritized over. So this all happened in consultations with ministries, with individual stakeholders, which was a bit time taking, but those are the only ones which really fast forwarded, because everyone understood the urgency. So what is the ask from the partners? They and again, the people who are stakeholders in this ecosystem, they facilitate cooperation and innovative, because it does take time. This requirement gathering, contextual assessment, and then planning and intervention, it does take time. So any cooperation, any learning which you may have had, that was something which was extremely important for us. In-kind contributions, whether it's developer hours, whether it's training hours, whether it's volunteer hours, whether it's content which is already there, whether it's translation services, those are the contributions which were extremely helpful for us, not to start from scratch, but actually move really fast on things. As I mentioned already, the country interventions, since were demand driven, it was always the countries which always were eager to share what they needed, and that was something which helped us a lot to make sure what do we prioritize and what do we not. And then, of course, if there are existing platforms and initiatives, often national platforms and things, instead of saying that, oh, no, we are the ones who are the subject matter experts, we know better than you, and your ecosystem is not something which we would talk to or work with. Those interventions and initiatives don't work. It has to be in integrated solution architecture, where those legacy systems are recognized, acknowledged, and that learner flow and other stakeholder flow is something which is definitely very well embedded within whatever initiative is being promised. So one of the case studies, which literally in 2 minutes I'll try cover is Imagine a Call, which was done with multiple stakeholders, GPE, Canopy, which developed the LMS, and Teacher Union for the 10 francophone countries. And the whole idea was this itself: that how do you create a multimodal content in specific languages, which works well with the national platforms, as well as this regional initiative tries to bring in the best practices amongst a common factor of a common manufacturer, common language, common requirements, and that kind of categorization was something which was able to be well catered to, but with right data plans, which made sure that there was right connectivity, right hardware providers, which made sure the systems were in place, right content providers, right curriculum designers, because many a times teachers are good in developing content, but do not have the instructional design capabilities. So having that distinction that every role was there is something which initiatives like Imagine a Call, Imagine Learning, which was again with the 5 Anglophone countries, as well as other initiatives in Asia Pacific like Waka Moana, and these were able to serve, which again was with SIDS, small island nations, which again had their own nuances and had their own requirements prioritized. So it's always against response, recovery, and resilience. How do you respond and see what's already available? How do you recover? How do you make sure that again it goes through all the when it was full lockdown, purely digital, when it started to become some remote learning possibility, then how does it cater to the hybrid models? And then when it's now getting fully open, then how do you still become relevant? How do you still become the most inclusive? And how do you still make sure that the platforms and the investments which have been made, they are still utilized? And that's where the resilience part comes in, where it's like, how do you make sure that the capacity building, as well as local capacities, individual as well as institutional, are something which are well developed when the schools are starting to reopen. So the question is that, again, since this wasn't a response to pandemic, where do we go from here? Because if you look at the areas, whether it's in the temporality or in terms of like things which are around it, whether it's around enhancing sanitation measures, introducing, expanding remote learning, whether it's supporting other areas, upskilling, reskilling trainings, or even if you look at the distributions and figures around in which area or which phase of learning is the infrastructure, because everything which we are trying to do is towards catering towards lifelong learning. And how do you make sure that your investments and your priorities are something which are always highlighted, whether it's from a financial funding point of view or from a demand assessment point of view? And then one of the challenges, which again, because it's a long investment, that's where education and learning sometimes, from a stimulus package point of view, the budget allocation is always begging, and 2.9% of total global stimulus package allocating to education and training, it's just not enough. And it has been a common problem even before the pandemic, just because when you put in money over here, that's something to see a return on it, the way traditionally return on it has been defined, is something which does take time and sometimes not as obvious to institutional developers. So what's UNESCO doing is it came up with 2 reports very recently, which I would really advise the community to go through, whether it was Future of Work or Future of Learning. The design principles were the same. They are all focusing on climate change, around lifelong learning, sustainable economies, societies, human-centered principles, as well as how do you make sure the equity is always challenged, and looking at the stakeholders when you think of it as a social contract for futures together, or workplaces, and how they need to be restructured and rethought on these principles, which are common challenges which are beyond border issues and go beyond the various dividing parameters. So finally, I just wanted to end with this slide where which just tells a kind of ecosystem thinking which we work with, which our initiatives try to plug within, where it starts with mapping of key holders, key stakeholders, then binding them to a common vision. Then how do you how do you make sure that everyone has in that mutual beneficiary capacity in that while trying to actualize that vision, create that collaborative environment, and then create those policies which are creating that accountability and that growth and scaling objectives, and then making sure that it's always fed back, and whatever you learn through this journey is something which allows you to iterate the next time with the right feedback. And that's how you make sure that the key capacities, and not just if it's all about centralized task force, which are subject matter experts, none of it would ever be able to get catered to just because of the scale of the problem. So the local capacity building, whether it's institutional or individual, is extremely, extremely important. Making sure on government policy level, this is something which we cater to, which we are, whether it's on the system policies, whether it's regulatory frameworks, whether it's public policies around digital transformation, data protection, intellectual property, or its evidence-based approach. These are the kind of things which does require a huge amount of mindset shifts, even in developed countries, and the governments and the ministries which are there to create awareness, to create incentives, to make sure that these efforts are made, is something which UNESCO is extremely interested in, and keeps on making sure that that's something which we don't lose sight of. And the final part, which is the bedrock of feeding through these levels, are again on these 4 levels is where we see it extremely as a platform on which these digital transformation initiatives could be based on, whether it's system level policy learning, whether it's partnerships with the like-minded, who are aligned on values, partners. Financing, making sure that it's an equitable financing, not a manipulative, not a sneaky ones which comes in to lock people, lock learners and their data, and second level derivative information, which leads into behavioral insights, but in a very transparent and sustainable way, creating financial models which support such missions. And finally, the technology infrastructure, that it doesn't. It cannot happen if that infrastructure around data, whether it's the actual hosting and processing of data, whether it's actual analyzing of data, as well as most importantly, which is the citizen buy-in and their understanding and communication prowess. Because if they understand it, then they would demand for the right things at their level, at local level, and at society level. So with this, I would stop, and I really look forward to your questions, your discussions, your things which you are wondering about, and not just during this presentation and the next 4 days of amazing set of speakers and experiences which you will listen to, but also as a community, what are the parts which interest you, which excite you, where you think UNESCO could play a role with these 3 principles. And I would highlight these principles, and then I would stop. First is one thing which is non-negotiable is how do you center the most marginalized communities? That has to be one of the objectives, whether it's through the solution design, whether it's through the regulation, whether it's through actual co-designing with the most marginalized, but really always having them in our mind when we develop any solution for them, whether it's digital or non-digital. Second is around how do you create a bedrock of interventions, which again allows that best practice sharing, allows that openness of access, openness of the data itself, of the model itself, of a capacity where there is an agency with others who are wanting to take advantage of it for furthering their own citizens and their own local contexts, and making sure that their representation is not lost. And the final part is connectivity, and connectivity not just in form of internet packages and data packs, but in the form of how do we reach to every single learner on this world, because no one, we believe in lifelong learning. I'm a learner. I want to remain all my life a learner. It's a right. It's UNESCO treats it as a human right. So how do we make sure that that human right reaches to every human on this planet? So these are three things which guide our work, our initiatives. This was what guided this particular initiative. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your ideas around how do we make this possible, because it's going to require this collective intelligence. Thank you.